My father humiliated me in front of 30 relatives and grounded me like a child. I packed and left without a word. He had no idea the house. He just promised my brother had been mine for 6 years. My father pointed his finger at me across a dining room table full of relatives and said the words with the practiced ease of a man who had been the loudest voice in every room his entire life. "You're grounded until you apologize to your brother." I'm 34 years old. The room erupted. Not polite laughter, real laughter. The comfortable, rollicking kind that only happens when people are absolutely certain they are not the subject of the joke. Aunts covering their mouths, cousins doubling over, my brother Brett grinning like he'd just won something. My face went hot in a way I hadn't felt since I was 16. My hands stayed perfectly still on the table. I looked at my father, Gordon Marsh, 61, the man who had been carving me up at family dinners for as long as I could remember, and I said one word, "All right," set down my wine glass, pushed back my chair, walked upstairs. The laughter followed me up every step. What none of them knew, not a single person in that room, not my brother who was already mentally spending money that wasn't his, not my mother who had whispered, "Don't make a scene," Gordon, and then watched him make one anyway, was that the house my father had just finished promising to my brother in a warm, funny, got the ants misty speech had been mine for 6 years. Every floorboard, every window, every inch of ground it stood on, mine. And the brass key I'd been carrying on my ring since the day I saved it, the owner's key, the one that opens the front deadbolt and the utility room and the lockbox in the basement, was sitting in my jacket pocket while 30 people laughed at me for getting grounded at 34. I left the guest key on the nightstand, stripped the bed, packed my bag, and drove home. My name is Tanya Marsh. I'm 34 years old, and I've been in commercial real estate for 11 years. I work out of an office in Columbus, Ohio, under the company name Cedar Hollow Holdings, LLC, a name I chose because it sounded like somewhere you'd want to build something permanent. I'm good at my job, not in the polished conference room way that some brokers perform competence. I mean, I'm actually good at it, at the molecular level, at the part of the work that most people find tedious, and I find genuinely interesting. I find the buried clause, the one that's been sitting on page 11 of a 40-page contract for 6 months while everyone argues about the headline number. I read the thing other people skim, and 9 times out of 10, that's where the deal actually lives. I've been doing this long enough to know that the truth in any transaction is almost never where it's advertised. Growing up, I was the older one, 18 months ahead of Brett, which in the Marsh family dynamic meant I had 18 extra months to establish my role as the responsible one, the quiet one, the one who didn't need as much. Gordon Marsh, my father, ran a mid-sized HVAC distribution business called Marsh Air Supply. He was good at it for a long time. He was also spectacular at spending what he made, at projecting confidence that slightly exceeded his actual position, and at building a family narrative in which Brett was the future and I was the backdrop. I don't say that with particular bitterness anymore, it's just accurate. Brett got the car for his 16th birthday. I got a bus pass and a lesson about self-sufficiency. Brett got his college covered entirely. I got 2 years of tuition before my father decided I needed to build character, and pulled the funding. I finished my finance degree on loans I spent 7 years paying off. Brett got the business introductions, the dinners, the attaboys. I got the occasional compliment that always seemed to arrive in the form of surprise. "Oh, Tanya, I didn't know you were working on something like that," as if my accomplishments were a pleasant accident. I told myself it was just the way some families were. I told myself it didn't shape me. Both of those things were lies. The person who was honest with me about the Marsh family dynamic, the one who never softened it into something easier to digest, was Arthur Hollis. Arthur has been my family's attorney for 30 years. He's 68, silver-haired, methodical in the way of men who learned their craft before everything became a transaction. He drafted my parents' wills, handled 2 property disputes, and incorporated my father's business back in 1993. He is not a man given to drama. When Arthur Hollis is shaken, something has genuinely gone wrong with the Earth's axis. I've known him since I was 4. He taught me what the word escrow meant when I was 12, sitting in his waiting room while my parents were inside signing something. He said, "It means held safely until the conditions are met, Tanya. It means nobody gets anything until everyone keeps their word." That stuck with me. 6 years ago, Gordon Marsh stopped keeping his word to the bank, and the bank decided it was done waiting. The call came from my mother on a Tuesday night in March, 11:48 p.m. on my iPhone screen, her name appearing in a way that told me before I even answered that something was wrong, because my mother did not call after 9 p.m. She considered it rude. Her voice was low, the careful low of someone who doesn't want to be heard through walls. "Tanya, there's a notice taped to the front door. I don't understand what it means." I sat up in bed. "What does it say?" She read it to me, slowly, making small sounds of confusion at the legal language. I didn't need her to finish. Notice of foreclosure sale. The house my parents had lived in for 26 years. The same house where I'd grown up, where every Christmas had happened, where the dining room table that Gordon Marsh would later use as his public humiliation stage had sat since before I was born, was 11 days from auction. My father had borrowed against the house twice in 2 years to prop up Marsh Air Supply, while the business was quietly collapsing. Then he had, with the particular combination of pride and magical thinking that had characterized him my entire life, stopped opening the bank's letters. By the time my mother found the notice on the door, the redemption window was almost closed. I asked her one question. "Does Dad know you're you're calling me? Silence. Okay, I said. Don't tell him yet. Let me look at the numbers. I was on my laptop by midnight. I had the county assessor's file, both mortgage records, and the foreclosure auction listing by 1:15 a.m. I ran the math 3 times because I kept expecting it to change. Outstanding principal, $318,000. Arrears, penalties, and auction fees, $41,200. Total to cure, $359,200. The house appraised at $520,000. I called my business accountant, Deb Fairchild, at 7 a.m. the next morning. Deb is a CPA with 20 years in commercial real estate finance and the ability to move money across entities faster than anyone I've ever worked with. I need to acquire a residential property in 9 days through Cedar Hollow, I said. Pre-foreclosure purchase, direct to lender. What do I need? Purchase price? $360, maybe $380 if they want a cushion. She exhaled. That's doable. Are you the intended occupant? No. The current occupants will continue as licensees. No lease. No rent. A pause. Tanya, whose house is this? I told her. Another pause. Longer. Does your father know? He will not know, I said, that the buyer is me. As far as he's concerned, an investor acquired the note and is allowing them to stay on as a goodwill arrangement. That is what we will tell them. Deb didn't argue. She's known me for 8 years. She recognized the tone. I'll have the entity docs and the offer letter to the bank by end of day, she said. Cedar Hollow Holdings LLC purchased the property at 4114 Carver Mill Road, Columbus, Ohio, for $371,500 on March 29th, 6 years ago. The transaction closed in 7 days. The bank took the offer without negotiation. They wanted the loan off their books, and a pre-foreclosure sale was cleaner than an auction. I told my parents an investor had stepped in, that they could stay. No rent required, ongoing at goodwill, no formal tenancy. My father accepted this with the dignity of a man who has been bailed out and needs to believe he was never truly in danger. He said something about the market turning and things working out. He did not ask many questions. He never asked who the investor was. I carried that secret for 6 years, and for 6 years he sat at that dining room table and made me the punchline. I almost told him twice. The first time was 18 months after the purchase at Thanksgiving. Gordon had spent the meal picking apart a deal I'd described, a commercial office complex I was brokering in Dublin, Ohio, with the comfortable authority of a man who had run an HVAC distribution business and therefore knew everything about every kind of real estate transaction. He got 3 fundamental things wrong about how commercial leases work. I corrected one of them gently. He talked over me and moved on. After dinner, I stood in my mother's kitchen washing dishes and felt the words rise up in me like pressure. I own this house, Dad. I bought it so you wouldn't lose it. 6 years ago, while you were deciding my career corrections weren't worth hearing. I swallowed them back down. The second time was 2 years ago, at Brett's birthday dinner. Brett had been working at a logistics company for 3 years and was, by his own account, on the verge of several different kinds of success. He decided, over the pasta course, to explain to me why residential real estate was less intellectually demanding than commercial. He had the particular confidence of someone who had never done either. I looked at my mother across the table. She looked at her plate. I said nothing. I told myself it wasn't the right moment. The truth was simpler and less flattering. I still wanted them to see me. I still thought that if I stayed close enough and stayed quiet enough and kept carrying the weight invisibly, eventually someone in that family would look up and notice. That is what I believed for 6 years. Until the morning I woke up early at 4114 Carver Mill Road and went downstairs for coffee and heard my father's voice coming from the dining room, low and careful, at an hour when he thought I was asleep. The coffee maker was still gurgling when I heard it. 3 voices, my father's, my mother's, Brett's. I stood in the hallway in my socks, mug in hand, and listened. Gordon's voice. Once it's in Brett's name, he pulls $150,000 in equity, enough for the down payment on the Lakeview lot and enough left over for the wedding venue. Brett, eager, already spending, and Tanya will co-sign. If the bank needs 2 signatures on Gordon, slow and satisfied, the way he sounds when he's explaining something to someone he considers less sophisticated. She'll apologize to her brother first, then she'll learn her place. She acts hard, but she folds, always has. She just needs to be reminded that she's not the favorite and never was. Silence. My mother's voice so quiet I almost missed it. Don't make a scene, Gordon. I stood in that hallway holding an empty mug and felt something go quiet inside me. Not hot, not loud, something cold and very clear, the way the surface of a contract goes clear when you finally find what you've been looking for on page 11. My father was going to announce tonight that he was gifting the house to Brett. Brett was going to pull $150,000 in equity against it. They needed my signature at some point, probably presented as a technicality, some co-borrower line item on a form I'd be expected to sign without reading. They had a whole choreography planned. The public humiliation was step 1. The compliance was supposed to be step 2. The problem, the fundamental load-bearing problem in their entire plan, was that the house wasn't Gordon Marsh's to give. It had never been Gordon Marsh's to give. My hands were completely still. That happens to me when the stakes are highest. The shaking comes later, when it's over and the adrenaline has nowhere to go. I texted Arthur Hollis at 6:22 a.m. One line. If he announces the house tonight, I want the truth on the table tomorrow. In writing, you should be there. 3 dots appeared almost immediately. For a man in his 60s, Arthur texted with remarkable speed. Are you certain? This cannot be unsaid. I looked down at my key ring on the kitchen counter. The brass key, the owner's key I'd carried for 6 years, years, the one that opened the front deadbolt and the utility room and had sat in my pocket through 100 family dinners, caught the light from the window over the sink. Send it, I typed. I'll explain tonight. Then I put my phone in my pocket, poured my coffee, and went down to be a guest at my father's party. Gordon gave the speech at 9 o'clock. He was warm. He was funny. He told a story about buying the house in 1991 that had the older aunt's Misty. He talked about legacy, about what it means to build something that lasts, about the importance of family continuity. This house is going to Brett, he said, voice thick with ceremony. Time to put the name where it belongs, on a man who will keep this family together. 30 relatives raised their glasses. My cousin Sloane filmed it on her phone. I raised my glass too. I kept my face neutral. I was very good that night at keeping my face neutral. Then Brett found me by the kitchen door, flush with the applause still ringing in his ears, and decided that triumph needed an audience. He leaned against the doorframe with the smile he'd been practicing since we were kids. Maybe Dad'll leave you the garage, Tanya. My big sister sells houses to strangers but can't seem to hold on to a man or a clue. I set down my wine glass. Around us, a few cousins went quiet. I said, I do sell houses, Brett. That's probably why I can tell the difference between owning one and borrowing against one you don't hold title to. The laughter in that corner of the room stopped like someone had cut a wire. Brett's smile flickered, just for a second. A half second, really. I saw him recalculate. Then the smile came back, slightly harder. Gordon had heard the tone shift from across the room. He crossed toward us with the brisk walk of a man who has been refereeing this dynamic for 30 years and considers himself excellent at it. He pointed at me. You're grounded until you apologize to your brother. The room broke open. 30 people laughing, the warm, comfortable laughing of people who are relieved not to be involved, who think this is a bit, who do not understand at all what is actually happening in that house. I looked at my father for a long moment. All right, I said. I walked upstairs, took the guest key off my ring, the standard cut copy I'd made the week I acquired the property and labeled guest in a kitchen drawer for 6 years, set it on the nightstand, kept the brass key, pulled my overnight bag from the closet. The bed was already made with the guest linens I'd put on 2 days ago. I stripped them, folded them, set them at the foot of the mattress. Then I walked out of the room, down the stairs, past the dining room full of laughing relatives, through the front door, and got in my car. I drove 40 minutes home in silence. My chest felt strange, not tight exactly, but dense, like something that had been compressed for a very long time was starting to take up its original shape. Quick pause. If you want more stories like this in better quality, my Spotify's linked in the description. I called Arthur from the car. Arthur Hollis, family attorney, 30 years of practice, the man who had taught me what escrow meant when I was 12. He picked up on the second ring. He made the announcement, I said. I assumed. Are you all right? I'm fine. He did it in front of everyone. 30 people, filmed on someone's phone. Silence on Arthur's end for a moment. And Brett, does he know about Cedar Hollow? No, neither does my mother. Nobody does. Tanya. Arthur's voice had the careful quality of a man choosing every syllable. When I walk in tomorrow with that deed, Gordon is there's going to be real damage here. Not just to him, to your mother, to the whole family picture of the last 6 years. I know. I want to make sure you've thought through. Arthur, I kept my voice quiet. He borrowed against a house he doesn't own in front of 30 witnesses, while his son talked about pulling $150,000 in equity, while my mother sat there and said, don't make a scene. This stopped being something I could manage quietly the moment he said my brother's name at that microphone. A long pause. All right, Arthur said. I'll be there at 9. I didn't sleep well. At 2:17 a.m., I was sitting at my kitchen table with my laptop, running through Cedar Hollow's ownership documentation for the 4th time. Warranty deed, county recorded. LLC operating agreement, sole member, Tanya R. Marsh. Title insurance policy, First American, issued at closing. Property tax records, 6 years of payments from Cedar Hollow's business account. Clean, airtight, the way I always built things. But knowing something is legally correct and sitting with what it means are two different experiences. And at 2 a.m. in my kitchen, I was very much sitting with what it meant. My father was going to find out, in front of whatever family members showed up the next morning, that the house he'd just publicly promised to my brother had been mine for 6 years, that the investor who'd stepped in was his daughter, that I had spent 6 years showing up to that dining room, getting talked over, getting called hard to love, getting publicly grounded at 34, while paying the property taxes on the building we were sitting in. That was going to break something. I'm not built for the pretense that it wasn't. By 4 a.m., I had made my peace with it and gone to bed. I arrived at 4114 Carver Mill Road at 8:45 the next morning with a travel mug of coffee and nothing else. I let myself in with the brass key. The house was quiet. Dishes from last night still in the drying rack. The dining room back in order, chairs pushed in, glasses collected. The only evidence of 30 people was a slight staleness in the air and a half-deflated balloon near the kitchen door. I sat at the dining room table, folded my hands around my mug, waited. Gordon came downstairs at 9:03. He was already dressed, collar buttoned, the residual satisfaction of last night's speech still around him like a second blazer. He stopped at the bottom of the stairs when he saw me. Then he smiled, the slow, satisfied smile of a man who believes the world has just confirmed his opinion of himself. Finally learned your place? He said. I didn't answer. Something in my silence must have registered, because his eyes moved to my hands. And then, I think, he noticed there was no bag, no suitcase in the hall, no visual evidence of a daughter returning to apologize. He frowned, walked past me toward the stairs. I heard his footsteps go up, heard the door to the guest room open, then silence, then footsteps coming back down, slower than they went up. He appeared in the doorway holding the guest key, the standard cut copy, the one I'd left on the nightstand. He looked at it, then at me. A muscle worked in his jaw. "Where are your things?" The doorbell rang, twice, fast, the sound of someone who has been walking briskly and hit the button before they fully stopped. I stood, went to the door. Arthur Hollis stood on the front step in his charcoal overcoat, a burgundy legal folio pressed against his chest, and he looked the way I had never once in 30 years seen Arthur Hollis look. He looked shaken. "Tanya," he said. His voice was controlled, but there was something underneath it, not anger, something more like grief, the particular grief of a man who understands the full weight of a document and has been up all night with it. I stepped aside, let him in. He walked into the dining room and set his folio on the table. The same table, the one that had hosted every dismemberment, every casual dismissal. 30 years of Gordon Marsh performing fatherhood to an audience that never questioned the casting. Gordon had followed me into the hallway. He looked at Arthur, and his expression moved through 3 phases in rapid succession: recognition, confusion, and then the beginning of something he was working very hard not to show. Arthur turned to face him. "Sir." His voice was not loud. It didn't need to be. "What have you done?" Behind us, I heard movement. My Aunt Renee coming down from the guest room upstairs, where she'd stayed overnight. Cousin Sloane, phone conspicuously down for once, appearing from the kitchen. Brett on the stairs, 3 steps from the bottom, having heard the door, hair still not fully combed. My mother standing in the doorway to the kitchen with a dish towel in her hands. Everyone in the room where they needed to be. Arthur opened the folio. He took out a document, heavy cream paper, county seal embossed at the top, the particular density of a recorded deed, and laid it flat on the dining room table with the deliberate care of someone placing the last piece of evidence before a verdict is read. "Gordon." He put one finger on the top of the page. His voice was the quietest in the room, but every person there was hearing it clearly. "You cannot give Brett this house." The room was stone still. "It hasn't been yours to give for 6 years. His finger moved down the page. "The owner of record is Cedar Hollow Holdings LLC. He paused. "The sole member of Cedar Hollow Holdings LLC. He looked up, looked straight at my father. "Is your daughter Tanya?" Gordon turned to me. The color that had been in his face since last night's triumph, since the speech, since the laughter, since finally learned your place, drained out of it so fast and so completely that for a moment I thought he might actually fall down. "You own my house?" I kept my hands wrapped around my coffee mug. 11 days from auction, Dad. My voice came out flat and steady, the voice I use when I'm reading a contract aloud. Mom called me at midnight. I'd already pulled the foreclosure filing by 1 a.m. The bank took Cedar Hollow's offer 6 days later. I paused. I bought it before it ever went to auction. The dish towel had dropped from my mother's hands. She was looking at me with an expression I'd never seen on her face before. Not guilt, exactly, but the expression of someone who is recalibrating several years of assumptions simultaneously. Brett had come to the bottom of the stairs without anyone noticing. He was holding the newel post. His face had the look of a man who had already mentally furnished the house and is now being told the floor plan doesn't exist. "You've been paying the property taxes," Arthur said to me. Not a question. He'd already reviewed the records. 6 years, I said. "The utility accounts. Also Cedar Hollow. I had them transferred the month after closing." I looked at my father. "I kept it secret so you would never have to feel what you just felt." I let that land. "You were humiliated last night, in your own dining room, in front of people who've known you for 30 years. I watched it happen to you at that podium, and it wasn't comfortable, was it, Dad?" Gordon said nothing. "I know what that feels like," I said. "I've been feeling it at this table for as long as I can remember." The room was the kind of quiet that has weight to it. 34 years of weight, pressed into the wallpaper and the floorboards and the table with the scratch along the left leaf where someone had moved a chair too fast in 1998. My father looked down at the deed on the table. The document didn't look back. It didn't need to. It was recorded, indexed, airtight, and it had been true for 6 years regardless of what anyone in this room had believed. Gordon Marsh opened his mouth, closed it. For the first time in my living memory, my father had nothing left to say. The weeks after were not simple. Justice rarely arrives clean. Arthur walked Brett through the legal reality the following day. There was no equity to pull, no transfer to record, no asset to leverage. The $150,000 Brett had been mentally building his future on dissolved before he'd technically had it. His fiancée Sloane had heard everything. She was quiet on the drive home, and from what my cousin later told me, the conversation they had that night about money and honesty was not a short one. Gordon hired his own attorney to review Cedar Hollow's ownership position. The attorney, a real estate litigator named Peter Vogt, whose office I actually recognized from a deal 2 years ago, called Arthur within a week. I heard about that conversation secondhand from Arthur, who relayed it with the tone of a man trying not to smile. Vogt had reviewed the deed, the LLC documentation, the title insurance, the 6 years of tax records, and called Arthur to confirm Cedar Hollow's ownership was clean, recorded, and unassailable. There was no legal mechanism by which Gordon could claim ownership or compel a transfer. He said to tell your client, Arthur said, that the deed is the deed. I almost laughed. My mother called me on a Thursday evening, 3 weeks later. Not late this time. 6:45 p.m. I'm the responsible hour. The hour of a woman who has thought carefully about what she wants to say. "I didn't know," she said, "that you were the one who—" "I know, Mom. I should have asked more questions. 6 years ago, when the the investor. You didn't want to know, I said. Not harshly, just precisely. And I didn't make you ask. She was quiet for a moment. Why didn't you tell us? I thought about standing in Arthur Hollis's waiting room at age 12, learning what escrow meant. About walking home from community college the semester my tuition ran out, running the numbers in my head on loans. About 11 years of finding the buried clause, of reading what other people skimmed, of knowing exactly what a document meant, and deciding when to say it out loud. Because I wanted you to have the house, I said, not the debt. And I wanted Dad to... I stopped, restarted. I thought if I stayed close enough, if I kept showing up, eventually he'd look up and see what was actually in front of him. A long pause. I'm sorry, my mother said, for last night, for a lot of nights. I believed her. That's the complicated part. I believed her. My mother is not a villain. She is a woman who made the choice over and over for 34 years to not make a scene. That's its own kind of damage, but it's not the same thing. I know, I said. Gordon has not called. I don't expect him to, and I've made my peace with that too. What would the call even sound like? The apology that could account for 6 years of invisibility? For she just needs to be reminded she's not the favorite. For grounding his 34-year-old daughter in front of 30 people. That apology doesn't exist in a form I'd know what to do with. I'm not waiting for it. Waiting for Gordon Marsh to see me clearly is what cost me 6 years of silence in the first place.